Okay, so I know we had a conversation maybe just like 2 weeks ago, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to get back to that and sort of finish it off. But one of the big questions that Alan, you left me with was, what can I do if my student has real problems coming up with their own ideas? And I think this is a issue that comes up a lot because it's okay. I got to make a sustained investigation, and I've got to come up with this portfolio of work, and it needs to have this really amazing, cool idea that really is developed, and I figure that out over a period of time. And what if I have students in my class who are super talented, and I know you've shown me some of the work, but that work that they make is a lot of times either copies of things that they've seen on the internet, they are copies of other artists' work, or they're a little too derivative from something else out there in the world. Now, every artist in the world takes and borrows and steals from things that have been done before them, but for the sustained investigation for the AP portfolio, doing a bunch of drawings from, let's say, a Marvel movie like Iron Man, doing a bunch of Iron Man illustrations that may be really, really well done and really expertly crafted is not really going to fly for the AP. So how do we get from doing the things that a student may love to do to getting them to create a body of work that is a little more focused and a little bit more original? So my questions start off with, and I've had this issue with kids many times every year, is what do they like doing? What is it that they like to make art-wise? There's got to be something. I've gotten out of the practice of trying to take a square peg and put it in a round hole. If I have a square peg, I'm just going to try to, reshape that hole to fit it and try to find the best way for that student to express the things that they like the most. So what do they like doing? And if it's illustrations of movies and things like that, that's great. What are they good at? If they stink at color pencil, but they love digital painting, then great, let's do digital painting, and vice versa. If pastels is their thing, then we have to figure out how to use pastels in a way that will work for them, and where their skill set lie. And what makes them excited to create artwork. I think that the body of work for a sustained investigation is something that you're showing the college board that you've worked on for 8, 9, 10 months, maybe for some students over 2 years, that it's got to be something that you're into and excited to make, because if you're not, how do you find the motivation to keep working? So one of the things I wrote over here, we don't have to know exactly what our sustained investigation is right this second. It's great. I have a class of 20 right now, and I have, I don't know, maybe 13 of them who they've got a really good start in terms of their idea and their concept, and they're working on projects that kind of fill that original question of what is their sustained investigation about. But I also have 5 or 6 kids who are really kind of meandering through a little bit, and some of it's about like what do they want to do, and some of it's trying to think too much, but it's okay. As long as we're making work right now, we can figure it out as we go along. But I think the important thing is to make work that we're excited about and make work that's original. And the concept and that idea, that concept and idea, it can change or evolve over time. That's okay. There's something called practice, experimentation, and revision. And that's a big part of the portfolio. And they look for that when they're grading it. So just having one great idea and churning out 15 beautiful examples of that idea, as great as that is, this can be a process. And I have a student's work from last year that I think is a really good example of going through this. So the student did apply to art schools. She did get into FIT and Pratt, Parsons, and I think there was one more. She ended up going, I believe, to Pratt. And her thing was, she was really into these characters. Now, the ones that I'm popping up on the screen right now are not original designs. What you're seeing here are digital paintings that she did, and these are things that she did on her own, but they would be either like TikTok or Instagram challenges where I guess an artist would post a drawing of one of their characters, and then like fans would come in and they would do their versions of that person's character. So this is literally like the best example of what shouldn't end up in your AP portfolio. I think this one especially, it was almost exactly like someone else's work. And she came in and she did her version of that drawing, which again, like the authorship of where that came from was not hers. She didn't come up with the character. She didn't come up with the design. She didn't even come up with a lot of the look. What she did is she redrew it in her own style and kind of added her own, her own touch to it. So I guess I don't follow stuff that much online, but this is a thing that people do. They put up, characters and things like that, and then we have fan art that is sort of derivative of that. So we'll see a bunch of the things that she made. Some of them were straight up, copies of other artists, and some of them were a little bit more of her own flair to it, and others were kind of, they were still not original enough to necessarily to work and work for our AP portfolio. So, one of the things was we spent a lot of the first part of the year, maybe trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. But this was the stuff she loved to do. This was the stuff that she was good at doing. So I kind of pushed her and asked her, what was it about these characters that she loved to do so much? And she loved all the sort of cutesy fashion kind of elements to it. She loved the sort of edgy baby doll kind of things. She liked on digital painting adding all these extra elements like teddy bears and flowers, curlicues, and all these extra visuals. So my feeling was, okay, so those are the things you really love about this thing. How can we translate that now into something that isn't so derivative of someone else's work? So it started with her. So I said, listen, let's get rid of the references and the faces that we're trying to use, online, and let's just use you. All right, so let's start with some self-portraits. And she was, in the beginning, very sort of insistent on, she wanted to kind of try to get away from just doing digital painting and digital art. So what we have over here is an acrylic painting. It's a self-portrait, and she was trying to go for the big hair and the fanciful fashions and flowers and a lot of things. And, paint, doesn't necessarily work the same as digital, the digital brush and tool. You obviously can make things, eliminate things digitally that you can't necessarily do with a paintbrush and acrylic. But we did a series of these, and I'll show you a few more of them in a little bit. So we were trying to key off of the things that she responded to most in her paintings. We realized that the digital painting might be something that she's a little bit more into and just better at. So my challenge to her was then, okay, I really want you to come through and make your own original version of this. I don't want it to be fan art. I don't want it to be too derivative of someone else's work. But let's start with the stuff that you like to do and the way you like to do it the best, and let's do a whole original piece. So this was a digital painting that she did of her own characters, and I think from a conversation with the two of us, I thought, let's just throw a theme in there, and let's just have something to focus on. So she was like, okay, sweets and cupcakes. I'll use that as my sort of jumping off point. So obviously the girl's holding the cupcakes, cupcake prints, cake prints, sweet, sugary kind of, flowy imagery is all throughout this thing. And it was a piece that she did that was like the fan art that she had become so prevalent at doing, but it was her own. We could say it's a little original. If we went out there and searched the web, we weren't going to find something that was exactly like this. Even though a lot of the character stuff was still sort of, still in this fan art phase. So we kind of jostled back and forth through these things, and my element was to try to push her to do some of the things that she really, liked to do, but also couple that with her skills. And I'm going to go to her portfolio right now, the one that we actually did submit for the AP, and we'll kind of look at how all of that culminated over that 9-10 months. So in the first few pieces, these are all 8x10 paintings that she tried to translate what she was doing digitally to acrylic. And you know what? It's painting. It's a little bit of a challenge. So these were not obviously as exciting or as exhilarating as the digital paintings that she did, but they were using that idea of cutesy fashion hair and different types of hair, this sort of comic book, anime, a magical world of imagery that pops up in the background, a lot of the textural things and little things that she was doing. In this case, we were focused on flowers. She was adding it to it. So she was trying to take a little bit of what she was into, in her fan art, and then obviously translate it to painting. We then kind of pushed, I was like, all right, so we're doing a lot with the hair. What else can you do about hair? And she was really like, she wanted to focus then, she wanted to turn her focus towards black hair and fashion. So the piece that you see down here is a result of that. And she wanted to do a bunch of different versions of herself with different hairstyles. And these are all color pencils. So that kind of came into how we're running out of time, and we spent a lot of time kind of like false starts. How do we make this work a little quicker? So the idea then became to really just do one face, her little portrait in color pencil. This is a close-up, and then do multiple different hairstyles. And we did a cutout so that she could slide different hairstyles onto the bald head that she had drawn in the original one. And now she was kind of focusing a little bit more on black pop fashion and hair, and using herself as the model again, and still working in color pencil. So we kind of jumped a little bit from the first thing to this, and working in a little more realistic fashion, but trying to keep some of the idea there. With that, there was some other things that she tried to do. She wanted to try to paint, so she painted a little bit, and this one started off, the original idea was to do like one hand with like, more popish gold chains, gold watches, and then to do another hand crisscrossing it with more traditional tribal African jewelry. And at the time, we didn't do too much of the drawing of everything. She did take it, scan it to the computer, and then do some extra stuff on the computer with it. But it also got us back to, let's say, hey, let's go back in and let's go back to digital painting. Let's do some of the things that you really like in digital painting. So you started talking about jewelry now. This idea of jewelry. We've got the black hair and, sort of like the changeability and mutability of different styles. Let's go back to digital painting. Let's try some stuff with that. So she focused on the jewelry aspect of it, and this was she did a couple not small, but quicker digital paintings, trying to experiment a little bit with like the door knocker earring and the grill, and sort of these gold chains. And here she came back to this whole thing about like that traditional African, where they have the gold rings around the neck. So she tried to do half of that like that, and on the other side she tried to do like Cuban links, so like the big heavy chain. So it was this idea came back again from the hand of like, okay, let's this old and new, this new school and more traditional thing, and she's back to our digital painting. That ended up being kind of interesting, even though maybe the piece itself wasn't like, oh my God, we both absolutely love it, because it wasn't necessarily the case. But I think this one really kind of got her on the right track. Now, it was a painting, it's gouache. She scanned it in the computer, and then she went back over it in the computer and embellished it a little bit more. But we had like the Nikes, the Air Force Ones, and the traditional sort of tribal sandal. And I think that really kind of hammered home like, okay, well, we have this interesting idea about juxtaposing, the new with the traditional. And that really set her off, and it was perfect. And we said, hey, listen, let's go back to your digital sort of painting thing. And this was a digital painting that she was doing that didn't quite all the way get there, but she wanted to, this was more about the black hair and fashion. But she got back into the digital painting, and she did one where she was sort of like trying to work a little bit more realistically and not so like cartoon and anime-ish, and then taking that idea of the old and the new, and that resulted in the last couple pieces, which I think really kind of brought her whole portfolio together. So in this case, she wanted to do the same model, and this was actually just a picture of a girl that we had in school, and she sort of looked through references online for Victorian fashion, and then she was kind of going for that sort of 90s sort of like over the top, she called it baby fat was the style of the time. So she kind of decided to work with realistic sort of people, take some of the digital painting stuff that she was really into, the hair and the black fashion and the jewelry, and then juxtapose the two ideas of the old and the new, the sort of Victorian fashion and the sort of 90s fashion, and do it all in a digital painting. So really, you could see a little bit of all the things she had been doing now for like months and months, and even the stuff that didn't end up in the portfolio that was unusable in the portfolio, all kind of coming together. And it really came together at I won't say the last minute, but what we're looking at right now is already like, this was like March of last year. So she got her first really like, what I think was her home run sort of touchstone piece. She got that all the way near the end of the process. And that led to more pieces. So where she went back to, again, this digital painting, realistic faces this time, focusing on the black hair and fashion and looking at, traditional African braids and African clothing and jewelry, and then taking that same thing and updating it to, 2022 streetwear. And, what is the same and what is different. And I think that, obviously the striking face, but then the hairstyle, how, and that's a big thing about like hairstyles in traditional African culture are, a lot of them are very regional and very, this particular people in this particular area at this particular time wore their hair like this. And this is stuff that, today gets reappropriated and sort of updated and just sort of taken to fashion. So, you have history happening in our hair. And that is a theme that she kind of got more in touch with as we went along in her like little bits of research. So we have the old and the new, we have the digital painting, we have the graphic design kind of things that she likes to add to it, all based in realism. And that takes us to really the last slide, which was just kind of showing a little bit of her process on how she actually did these things, showing you a little bit behind on like how the sausage is made. So really what you have in the last few is that you have like the last few images are really like her best work. And really just the last two, bring together everything that she was doing into like a cohesive idea. And then when we look at her write-up, and I think that will be the important part over here, we're being asked like, what was the question that guided the sustained investigation? And describe how the sustained investigation shows evidence of practice, experimentation, and revision. So I started with the idea of exploring black hair and culture. In exploring different mediums and broadening my ideas to encompass jewelry and fashion, I expanded the goal of my work, which ultimately brings all these things together and connect different looks with different periods of time. It was not the idea that I necessarily started with in slides 1 to 3, but what my sustained investigation became was, how can I make a statement on how black fashion has evolved and how it still has roots in history. Slides 13 to 15. I feel like all of the early work culminates stylistically and conceptually in the last pieces. So I think that to me is one of the great ones where, like I told you guys before, that your sustained investigation, your portfolio, you get to, as the student, decide what your test is on. And the work that you produce is the answer to that question. And each piece doesn't have to answer the question. The whole body of work has to. And I think that when you talk about practice, experimentation, and revision, you could see in her portfolio, the first 3/4 of it is all practice, experimentation, and revision. The idea from beginning to end is still within a vein. Like if you look at all of them, we can see, okay, black hair and fashion, pop sort of anime kind of stuff, and hair and more realism, maybe some old and new, some things like even like a piece like this, it doesn't necessarily fit into the whole ultimate idea, but it's in a little way shows the work that she did to get there. And it shows you the process that she took to get to the end. So whereas her portfolio, which did get graded out as a 5, I think the best parts of these portfolios are only 2 pieces at the very end. This one and the last one, I really do think that they are home run, sustained investigation pieces. The pieces leading up to them are not as strong, maybe not as good in a lot of ways, but they all informed the last one, and that was part of her process. So it can be a situation where the student really they got it right from the beginning. They had a wonderful idea and they're exploring it through 15 beautifully finished pieces. Or it could be that, hey, listen, it took me a while to get to the finish line, but where I got to was exciting. And this was the stuff that got me there. Now, for some of your students, I know they might be really into like that kind of fan art stuff. And I think the biggest thing that I would tell a student here is like, what is it that you like about that work? Is it the drama or the sci-fi? Is it the colors and the shapes and the pop artiness? Is it the method that you're doing it? And let's try to find a way to make your own story using the things that you like to do the best. And try to, even though you may use references from online, try to find a way to make them your own. One of the ways this student made her own was ditching the online faces and working with her own to start with. And that was a way. For response number 2 about practice, experimentation, and revision, I'll just read this really quick because I think that it's important. But my earliest attempts in acrylic took a fun, whimsical perspective utilizing pop art colors and visuals. I created a piece to try to show the mutability of black hair looks in slide 4. I experimented with digital painting and broadening my focus onto jewelry and body adornments in slides 7 to 9. I tried to blend some of my analog painting done in gouache, scanned, and then painted over them in digital programs, slides 6 and 10. It all culminated in works that juxtapose different eras of black hair, jewelry, and fashion. Slide 15 shows the process of sketching, blocking color, and layering brushstrokes. So her portfolio, where there's a couple really great pieces and there's a lot of process, well, it shows experimentation. It shows revision. She talks about that in her answer, and hopefully that answer sort of illuminates a little bit of what we're looking at right now. So that's my example of like what to do when a student has trouble getting their own ideas, how we got from her early attempts in stuff that was straight up copies off of online references to her own original work, and how ultimately over a period of time and months we were both frustrated at times in putting together this portfolio. It worked out really great, but it wasn't, just everything's perfect, everything works really smooth. It was a process and trying different things and seeing where they went and trying to figure out what the next idea is. And sometimes the most, innocuous, haphazardly afterthought idea that popped up, let's say here and here, ended up being an idea that was worth exploring a little further. And that came directly from what the student was trying to do without really thinking about it. And then a piece that doesn't necessarily work great in terms of what the final ones look like. Really, this idea of putting this old and new and adding that historical element really kind of comes all together. So hopefully that's helpful. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know I talk a lot and repeat the same things over and over again, so I hope I didn't bore you to death. Good luck.